Tuned in, the signal's clear. Coming through Geocache Talk. A voice on the line I hear. Coming through Geocache Talk.
It's time for Geocache Talk. Whether you are at work, in the car, or wherever you are, we hope you enjoy this show about the great sport of geocaching. If you're watching live on YouTube, you can be part of the adventure tonight in the chat room and participate with others as they watch the show. If you are listening later, please give it a like and subscribe on your favorite podcasting app so that you can get all of the weekly Geocache Talk goodness.
Well, there we go. The beginning of this one will be fun show. Thanks for big thanks to the Travel Bugs for our music and all of our patrons. Thank you so much. New patrons: RX Wranglers, Railroad, Mustard Devil, and Audie Olson. If you'd like to become a patron, head on over to patreon.com/geocache talk for more details, or you can click on the Become a Patron link. It's on the front page of the website. Patrons get the now famous blackout coin. He's got his coin. Jesse usually puts yours in the car, but you're on mute, buddy. Let me unmute you.
Oh, okay.
There you go. Now you're mute. Now you're
I didn't
unmuted.
think anything worthwhile anyway, so it's okay.
That's okay. Yeah,
I'm
usually
happy I actually brought it in for my Jeep, so I'm good.
Jesse carries his around. Also, other geocaching items during the year, bonus content, book club.
Yep, coming up again soon.
Yep, another book. That's cool. Invites to special events only for patrons. Support levels start at as little as Bison Tube level. That's just $3 a month. Well, let's jump right into show 210. We got a lot to cover and a lot to talk about. So we welcome to the show Dr. Luther Beagle. Welcome to Geocache Talk.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
We are thrilled to have you here. We got a lot to cover, a lot to talk about. It's going to be fascinating and fun. Jesse and I are huge space nerds. So space geeks, I don't know what you want to call us. We're fans.
It both probably applies, right? Yeah.
Space fans. So a lot of people in the chat room. If you have questions, obviously put in the chat room. We'll look at it and we'll throw it out there if we can, and we'll just kind of go through and go from there. So good to see everybody there. Burnt turtles. Hello, space cadets. So yeah, tell us where you're from. That's always fun to see too. All right, so people appreciate you being on, and they spelled your name right, so that's good. That's always a good sign. So a little bit of your background, Dr. Beagle. You
I'm good.
I was gonna say, go ahead. You're I want to make sure I get this right. You're the deputy division manager now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
For science at Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. And I'm also the SHERLOC instrument principal investigator. The SHERLOC instrument is on the Perseverance rover that just blasted off last week.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty cool. Yes.
Yeah. We'll talk a little bit. We'll definitely talk a lot about SHERLOC and the rovers and Perseverance. It's fascinating, and we'll dive into that. I want to talk a little bit at the beginning about some of the things that I had learned in Tricacheus. Yeah, it is rocket science. So there you go. Sure hears that all the time.
Yes, it's great.
Greetings, Earthlings, I come in peace. So there have been actually quite a few, going back through the history of Mars exploration attempts. Some successful, some not so successful. I was surprised that there was so many that have been attempted, over 50 from what one person said, but the Russians had many failures of attempts,
Yeah.
but at least they is the video I watched to give them a golf clap, because they really tried hard for many years. We had several, some failure, but some success too.
Yeah.
We had the people remember or read about, the Mariner and the Viking missions were to me were fascinating growing up. Seeing them discuss, putting them either in orbit or putting something on the Mars surface, to me was just amazing to do.
So what they did was they did a series of basically experiments. They flew by first. The original Mariners flew by, took pictures on their way by, because they didn't know how to get into orbit. Then they figured out how to get into orbit. So we got into orbit, and then we got into orbit, and we landed, and then we took some time off, and then we started going back, and we had a couple of failures along the way, because it turns out that sending something to Mars is hard. It's a learning experience, right? And you basically learn something every single time you go, and that's where we are now.
Yeah, Tom's comment was no failures. We just learned how not to do it.
Right. You learn at best. The best failures are something that you learn something from. So there's a good failure and a bad failure, and we now have the ability to at least learn how we failed, and that's really important. That hasn't always been the case, but that's been a really important thing.
Yeah. It's very cool. So
before we're jumping ahead, Gary's getting so excited we're jumping ahead, but we haven't really got to your background yet. So before we skip that, it's not like you just stumbled into being a rocket scientist, right?
He didn't go to Indeed.com and just sign up.
No, it's a long line. No, so I grew up in Delaware. In Delaware, went to the University of Delaware, got a physics degree. Decided to go to graduate school. Decided to go to a different part of the country. Ended up at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Studied there for 5 years. Got my PhD in physics/astrophysics. My advisor was really into looking for life on other planets. Tom Dowiak, who's passed away. And I got a postdoc out at Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Decided to come out here for a year. It's in Los Angeles. Figured there's no way I want to live in LA, but I'm out here for 23 years now. I have property, own kids, and been studying, trying to figure out how to look for life on other planets ever since. And it's a beautiful thing, because it's multidisciplinary. All of my science friends think I'm an engineer, and all of my engineering friends think I'm a scientist. And you learn all these different things. It's been a wonderful ride.
Was it that professor that you mentioned that really got you excited and decided that's the field you're going to be in, or were you already there? Like the professor was excited about, life on other planets. Is that what really energized you? Because you can go many ways with where you were at that point, right?
Yeah, and I think that the people that worked with me at UAB, they all went in different ways themselves. I just got energized. The thought of, it's a real problem of how do we find life as we don't know it, and what does that life look like? And one of the things that humanity's always thought about is there other people in the universe? And the best place to go look for that right now is Europa, Enceladus, and Mars. And so we're going to look for life on Mars now, or signs of life on Mars, and eventually we will check out Europa and Enceladus, and then eventually we'll start spreading out to other solar systems. The more exoplanets we find, the better the chance there's actually intelligent life out there somewhere. And finding all that things is really what we want to do, because humanity always needs to explore.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And it's actually what geocaching is exploring. We're exploring different places, and it all ties back together.
Yeah, exactly.
It does, and we love this planet, but it'd be good if we had humans on a couple other planets, or
yes,
exactly. A couple of good safe places to go. Not that we can think of any parallels right now, because we're not going to mention boring, unpleasant stuff tonight. But there's some good reasons to have people in other places right now.
it does increase the chances of nothing bad happening to the entire species. Yes, multi-planet species is the way we're probably destined to go.
Right.
Yeah.
But it is hard, and that's the problem, is that it's going to be hard no matter what we do. So little baby steps.
Well, and we can't ever, and we're joking around a little bit, with that stuff, but you can't do that without people like you taking the steps. You and I will probably never see a lot of these things that we dream they're going to happen, but you're doing those day-to-day things and like what we're going to talk about tonight and the failed missions in the past. If we don't take those steps, we're not going to get to those other ones. You can't just jump to the end of it. So.
Well, the funny thing is that I don't like to fly, so I'm not going to Mars. And even if I did like to fly, what the quarantine has shown me over the years is that I cannot be in a very small, confined space with other people. So I'm not hardwired to do any astronauts at all. Thank God somebody is able to do that.
Yeah.
No, I need to go outside. I need to walk. I need to get out and move. Not going to happen.
Yeah,
we all agree with you. So.
I'm kind of claustrophobic, so I don't. Yeah, I'm not interested in that. Whenever they crawl in those little tiny things, it's like, oh, it's. Yeah, I couldn't do it.
I'm so glad somebody can.
That's right. Speaking of that, the life part, we talked before, and we, did some checking this week, but there was some possibility. There was some meteorites that have been studied here on Earth, and that's something I didn't realize. We're going to talk a little bit too about as far as meteorites, Martian meteorites, and there was talk a little bit about how there was some discussions, cutting into one of the meteorites and then trying to look at it and going, well, I think this is actual life, and they're like, well, wait a minute. Is it really life, or what is this?
So one of the gentlemen that actually came up with the idea of putting the geocache on the SHERLOC Cal target, which we'll get to, is a guy by the name of Mark Fries, who is a researcher at the Johnson Space Center. And one of the things he does is he does the meteorite curation with Francis McCubbin and Aaron Burton and a whole bunch of other people at Johnson, some really good people. And so what we do is we send people down to Antarctica, and we go to Antarctica and we look on the white ice sheet and you look for black things, and the black things are probably meteorites. Right. And so every year they send a bunch of people down there, they go collect meteorites, and of those meteorites, a very small percentage turn out to be from Mars. There are other places where meteorites fall a lot that you see, deserts and other places, just because it's easy to pick up on, oh, that's a black thing in that yellow sand. So we do pick up those meteorites, and they do tend to be from Mars. And a few of them, I don't know what the percentage is, but it can't be more than 1%. It's probably less than that. But what happens is that something comes and hits Mars. Mars is very cratered, blows things out into space, and occasionally those things make their way to Earth. There's even been people that have theorized that panspermia can take place, which is one planet sending life to another planet. I don't know if any of that happens, but that's a theory. So one of the things that was really interesting in the astrobiology field is that in 1996, there was a paper in Science that looked into a Martian meteorite called Allen Hills 84001. And what that means is that meteorite was found on a place called Allen Hills in Antarctica in 1984, and it was the first meteorite picked up. Turns out that meteorite was from Mars. And when they cut this meteorite open, they found a lot of things in there that made them think that there was life associated with that rock. And so they published the paper, and what happened is in the community went crazy, and we started thinking about this, and we started moving on. And in fact, if you've ever seen the movie Contact, the press conference that Bill Clinton was giving was about that meteorite, and they just took a little bit of it and they put it in the movie Contact. And so as a community, we started really thinking about, what is life? How do we find it? How do we detect it? And that really did kick off this entire discussion of what life is and how to go find it. And we're not necessarily going to look for life. We're looking for what we call a potential biosignature, which means that it could have been alive. And it just changes things up a lot. And that's the theory. That's what we're doing moving forward.
Cool. We have people who they're volunteering already.
There is actually a call, and it usually is from the NSF, and the NSF asks for volunteers, and you can write a proposal. and you can go down. I don't know how many people end up going down every year, but there is a call. So you just look for that on the NSF website.
There you go. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. We're moving on to, let's talk a little bit about, this is a fascinating story that you told me, and I went and did some looking, because we're going to talk tonight about, obviously we're going to talk about the trackable here in a little bit, but we want to talk a little bit about, and later about some more geocaching, but something that you guys did on, was it Opportunity? The wheels of Opportunity?
Yeah. No, it was Curiosity. It's
Curiosity.
the Mars Science Laboratory.
Yeah, Curiosity. So tell the story you told me about the.
Well, so we have part of what we're putting on the rover is we're putting on the geocache coin and the maze, which we'll talk about here in a bit, and the spacesuit material. Is we put things on the rover for a reason. Usually they're texts, but there's always a reason for them. We just don't throw things on there, and we'll discuss that later. But one of the things that we do need to do is we for rovers, the big giant rovers, is you're never quite sure how far you go, and the rover needs to kind of understand what that is. So when the wheels turn around, there's holes in the individual wheels. And on Curiosity, the wheels have a bunch of holes that are different sizes and shapes, and you roll over things, and you can look behind you, and you can tell how much you're slipping and how much you're ever going.
Right.
And the story behind that was that it was going to say JPL, but that brings too much attention to us. And the cat's been out of the bag. You can look this up online. But that brings too much attention to us, because it really is more than just one center. It's everybody doing it. We've had help from both Goddard and JSC and ASC and everybody else. So it was decided not to put the letters JPL in so obvious a configuration.
Right.
So what happened was then on the wheels themselves, now the holes are basically Morse code for JPL. So it doesn't really scream out JPL. You really have to see. There you go. So when you roll over things, you see the little thing on the sides, and it spells out JPL. And it's one way of just making sure that we're going where we think we're going with as long as we're going. And the reason this is important is because the maze target, which we'll see later in the show, we had to prove to them that it didn't spell something out when you solved it, like JPL rules the world or something else like that. We made sure that there is nothing that it spells out, and it's just part of getting the process through the system. They want to make sure that we're not doing anything embarrassing, because it's we're scientists. Sometimes we think things are funny, but they're not.
Can I get you to turn your speakers down just a touch, Dr. Beagle? I get kind of getting weird feedback. Thanks, sir.
So that you mentioned that, because we're not scientists, right? There may be some listening, but Gary and I are not. So we watch movies like you mentioned, Contact and things like that, and we're like, that seems kind of silly, because it's movies, right? But it's got to be a different perspective when you and your scientist buddies are watching that, right? Is it just hard to watch those, or can you dismiss reality enough?
It depends on the movie. There are issues with certain movies. Like, I can't watch Armageddon, but I can watch Deep Impact. I can't watch Armageddon at all. It bothers me, because they try to take it too seriously, and it just bothers me. But John Wick is one of my favorite movies, and there's nothing scientific about that at all.
Right.
It really depends on how well they're doing it and how they're showing things. I just watched Ex Machina last night, and that's a great movie. And you just feel it. But then I go back to one of the movies of my youth, which is actually what got me into planetary science in the first place, which is Robinson Crusoe on Mars. And I made the mistake of watching that again. I should never have watched that again after I was 7. Just complete. But the movies do it. But there are a lot of funny things that we end up doing. We all have weird senses of humor. On SHERLOC, we put on a camera, and we of course had to call that Watson. And we had our cables that go down the line. We made up an acronym for that, Adler. we submitted a proposal called Moriarty one time, and it's just you get into this thing where after a while where you're just having fun. So you sit around and think of things. So we have like acronym parties where we just think of acronyms. It's all goofy. It's just goofy fun.
It's good stuff. And you actually have a guy named Acroman, right? Is he?
Well, that's the guy that came up with the Roe Bartia is the deputy PI. He came up with the SHERLOC acronym and the Watson acronym and the Adler acronym and Moriarty. Yeah, he's very good. Yeah, yeah. So it's something. You have geeky humor. You sometimes watch things. There was a great quote from SETI after contact, which is they were talking about the guy playing golf while he was listening to the sounds. And the guy from SETI said, no, that was completely unrealistic. Everybody knows we sit around and play Civilization instead of golf. And so, it's just little things like that. And we talk in the industry and, and we have a good time sometimes. And it's all geeky fun.
Oh yeah.
It's a job, but it's still people in the job. So.
Yeah. And one of the things I worked on when I worked on Curiosity, I was a scientist that helped drilling process, and somebody asked me, why aren't we drilling more? And I said, look, if it was up to me, I would be spelling my name in the sand with the drill. So it's, we're doing the best we can with what we have. Yeah.
Nice.
That's
So I want to show a couple items tonight because I find them fascinating to talk about. So this is kind of a cool site. There's old Perseverance out there moving its way along. I like this because is this you think it's a fairly accurate depiction of the?
It's pretty accurate. So it tells you exactly how far away we are, exactly how the speed and the rotation and everything like that. In fact, we saw a gentleman that had done a ground-based. You can do ground-based telescopes that watch the rover as it went away, because it gets fainter and fainter as it moves away. But he actually mapped out the rotation period from the light curves, and that was just awesome to do. There's actually a really cool website called I think it's Eyes on DSN at JPL, and that's a fascinating website too. If you have that up. But this one we watch all the time too, just watching how far away it's getting and realizing how far of a distance everything is. It's mind-boggling at times.
Yeah, I've got. It's this one. Okay, let me switch. Yeah, because it's amazing when you see. This one's fascinating.
Yeah. We're traveling pretty fast, aren't we?
Yeah. 72,795 miles per hour. And I like the fact that it says speed relative to the sun.
Right. Everything's relative. And the problem is that we've got to take that speed down to zero when we get on the surface. And that's where a lot of the real stress comes in, which is the landing in February. When you go from 72,000 miles an hour to zero in about 7 minutes. So everything has to go right there. There's not a lot of room for error. And hence the reason they call it the 7 minutes of terror.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. So that's the other fascinating thing to me is that we're traveling, we need distance to travel to Mars, 274 million miles.
Yeah.
It's going down though. Look,
we're getting closer every second.
You've already traveled 18 million, right? 18.5 million. Have I read that right?
Pretty fascinating. It's been a week.
Yeah. And, like you said, and we're not getting into tonight, but it is amazing to think about, getting, once you get there, like you said, it's like, you got to make sure everything's just right, or you don't go. The orbiting, do you get into? We
go straight to the surface. We hit the outer atmosphere going 72,000 miles an hour relative to the sun. There's a heat shield that hits first, and that takes us down a whole lot. It dumps a lot of energy in the atmosphere. But Mars's atmosphere isn't that much. It's about 1/100th of the Earth on the surface. So it's not a lot to slow us completely down. So after that, we have a parachute. That parachute gets us down to a couple hundred miles an hour. And once we get down to that we get rid of the parachute because we don't need it anymore. And then we come in and we do something called the sky crane, and that's a powered descent. And so if the sky crane is on top of the rover, it's basically grabbing the rover. You get to right above the surface, and then the rover, basically the sky crane holds still, and the rover gets lowered down slowly, hits the ground with its wheels down, disconnects, and then this thing flies away. And then we're good to go. We're up and running on the surface, which isn't as crazy as the old way of doing it for the MER rover, Spirit and Opportunity. Those were big bouncy balls. So in that, we did everything except the sky crane. It was a big bouncy ball, blow up, and then you just bounce across the surface a bunch until you stop bouncing. You open up, and then you just roll over off the platform.
It's what's amazing is that you pitched that idea. Like, all right, here's how we're going to this thing. We're going to put it in a big bouncy ball and shoot it to Mars. Like, that had to be an interesting first meeting. So.
They're all interesting first meetings because even the sky crane is insane when you first look at it. You're like, why would you, what? And they talk about this there's a YouTube video, 7 Minutes of Terror, everybody should check out. They talk about it on this. When the first you see it, you're like, this is insane. Why would you do that? There's got to be a better way. This doesn't look like it's going to work. But then the more you get into it and the more the engineers put pens to paper and do their CAD models, it actually is good engineering. And the engineering is solid. It's worked in the past, and we take it and we run with it and we move along. It's fascinating that it works, but it does because of the great engineering of the whole entire team. And then when I was talking about different centers, we've had help with that at EDL from places like Langley and other centers, which is what makes NASA great is we have specialties all over the country.
I had a question come in. And again, if you get your volume of I'm getting feedback from you, Dr.
Sure.
See if you can get the speaker part. Yeah. So appreciate that. So do you have to account? I know that there's points during your journey that you can make some minor course corrections if you had to, right?
We do. We make several course corrections because the planet's moving a little faster, a little slower. The spacecraft is moving a little faster or slower. So you do change your course a little bit. But there's not a lot of space debris. Contrary to the movies where, what was it? Empire Strikes Back, where they're in their asteroid field. It doesn't look like that. They're so far spread out that you don't really ever see anything. You very seldom run into anything, and it would be a shocking thing if we hit anything on the way because space is a vacuum for all intents and purposes.
Hold on, are you saying that Star Wars is not accurate?
There's a few physics things that are wrong with it. Yes, just a few.
Just a few of them. Okay.
Just a few.
Yeah. We could sit here and critique every movie. That would be bad science is always fun to do on movies. We actually do that as a group. We will watch a movie and then just dissect the science because sometimes it's fun to think about. Like in Star Trek, I don't understand how you can be going faster than light and look behind you and see what's behind you because the light can't catch up. And so once you think about that, all of Star Trek is you're right. It doesn't work. You have no idea what's behind you.
Right.
Yeah. Crazy. So let's talk a little bit more about the rover a little bit and things that are on the rover, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the connections and your connections with geocaching is interesting, and a lot of JPL employees geocache, as you mentioned before. That's really cool. So I was doing some reading and I noticed that it has on. You guys are taking up is this still accurate? Are you all taking up a drone? Is that right?
So
helicopter?
The payload has 7 instruments, and we're doing sample return. But one of the really cool things is a tech demonstration, and that's a helicopter. and the helicopter is on the belly pan of the rover. It's on the belly pan. And at one point during the first couple months of the mission, they will take us, because we have a really cool camera called Watson, and then we will look underneath the pan and we will watch the helicopter drop. We will back up, and that helicopter then will fly, and it's supposed to fly a handful of times. It can fly for about maybe 1 or 2 minutes at a time, and it's got to be close to the rover for telecon. But it's a tech demonstration, and if it works, it really shows you how to move forward. So everything moves forward on Mars. So Pathfinder was a very small rover. It's about the size of a shoebox, a little bigger than a shoebox. And now we've got rovers that are as big as Mini Coopers. And what happens is you learn a little bit from the rovers like Sojourner. You get them more advanced. You get two MER rovers, Spirit and Opportunity. And then you get something as big as MSL, which is, the Spirit and Opportunity were about 200 kilograms each. MSL, or Curiosity, was 900 kilograms each. We're 1,000 kilograms. And it just gets more and more complex as you go along, because you learn more. You don't have to reinvent things you already figured out how to do. The problem is if you do too much at one time, then it's way too complicated. And that becomes very difficult to do as well. So you do take giant leaps forward, but you want to make sure that you can actually stand when you leap. So with the helicopter Ingenuity, it will take a handful of launches, and then it'll map the ground. It'll send back a couple pictures, and then we'll be able to see where we are. And eventually, one day, this may lead to a helicopter rover combination, where the helicopter could go out and take images of a kilometer away, and the rover then could move a lot further. So the problem with the rover moving is the rover kind of has to know where it's going. Otherwise, like it did in the Big Bang Theory, you could fall off a cliff, right, which would be bad, in case you're wondering on the difference between good and bad. And the rover itself, you map things out of where you want to go. So the rover can go as far as it can see, and then a little bit further with visual odometry. But if you had a map of where you were going, that rover can go a lot further. And so maybe the next rover does that. Maybe the next rover can go a kilometer in a sol, an individual sol. And by the way, a sol is a day on Mars. 25 hours versus 24 hours on the Earth.
Yeah.
And so this is a tech demonstration that leads to something bigger. And everything leads to something bigger and better. And that's why we do what we do.
Yeah, Joe Bids mentioned about flying in 1/100th atmosphere. Yeah, I did read where the RPMs on Ingenuity have got to be spinning fast.
It's pretty cool. I think I know I've seen a video. I don't know whether it's on YouTube, of it flying in the Mars chamber. We have a Mars chamber at JPL. It's a 33-foot chamber that basically pumps down Mars pressure, and those blades do cook. It's pretty cool to watch it. And there's actually microphones on this particular mission, so we'll be able to hear the helicopter if it's not too far away. The Mars's atmosphere is not very good at conducting sound because of the low pressure, but you might be able to hear it, and which would be really awesome to be able to hear sounds. We should be able to hear the drill, and we should be able to hear the laser from SuperCam as it drills into rocks on the surface. So it's going to be a really cool mission.
Yeah, there's a part that's kind of interesting you're doing with the you mentioned, you actually put in the show notes, was kind of interesting, is Perseverance is going to be leaving geocaches, basically. Yeah, they're geocaches, not in the terms that we think of a geocache, but it's leaving caches on the surface as it goes along. You're taking samples, right, and you're going to be leaving them. So there's a lot of FTFs out there if people want to go up there.
It's a very good analogy. So what this mission is going to do is, we talked a little bit about how difficult it is to find life in a rock, and the Allen Hills 84001 showed us how difficult that was. In fact, we still argue a lot about whether or not there was life in ancient Earth rocks. So last year I went to Australia, to the outback, to the Straley Pool Formation, which is 3.4 billion years, and you can see the story in the Straley Pool Formation, and you can believe that, okay, I can see where I'm looking at was ancient life. But then you go to a place like Greenland that has 3.5 billion year old rocks, And we're having this big debate on whether those rocks actually had life associated with it. And one thing I'm fairly certain about is that Earth had life associated with it at one point anyway. So we already know that there's life on the Earth, and we're still having these scientific debates on whether or not these rocks are biogenic or not. So on Mars, we have the same issue, except we're never quite sure whether there was life on Mars. And if there was life on Mars, it's probably really small microorganisms, single-celled bugs,
Right.
as we like to call them. So whenever I say bugs from here on in, I'm talking about single-celled organisms, not the Sand Kings from the old Outer Limits episodes. But we need to think about how to do that. And so it's become apparent that one of the best ways to do this is that no one instrument is going to be able to tell you whether or not ancient life is associated with a particular sample. So this particular mission has a great science payload, and we're going to do great science on the surface. What we're going to do is we're going to go out and pick out samples from specific spots where we know what it was like. So we're going to a river delta in Jezero Crater. This is a river delta. It had hydrothermal material on the place where we're going to land. We're landing right in front of the ancient river delta. We're going to climb up the river delta, and we're going to go to an ancient beds where there was liquid water flowing. And we're going to pick up samples that we think may have had life associated with them. We're going to put them in tubes about this big, about 1 centimeter in diameter. We're going to seal them up. We're going to drop them on the surface. And eventually another rover, probably in 2026 or 2028, picks them up, brings them back to a Mars Ascent Vehicle, or MAV, and then those samples will eventually be returned to the Earth in the early 2030s. And then we'll be able to tell for certain whether or not there was life associated with that rock or not. So we go from a place of us identifying potential biosignatures on the surface, us meeting the science team of Perseverance, to bringing that sample back to verifying it with instruments that may or may not even exist at this point, or maybe the size of a house that you can't put on a rover. And then we'll take those particular samples and start answering these questions. Did Mars have life associated with it? Did Mars not? Could Mars have had life associated with it? Was it habitable? What's the history of this sample? Is the sample really what we thought it was? Is there anything we can learn from it more than we would on the surface? And the answer to those questions is always yes. The problem with the Martian meteorites now is you're not sure where they came from, and they've been altered by the impact of a rock. So I can take a little piece of Mars and hold it in my hand and say, well, I think this is a basaltic lava or some other material. But I don't know exactly where it came from. Did it come from a river delta? Did it come from a hydrothermal vent? Was it altered? What is exactly going on with that rock? The samples we'll bring back all of those will be documented. And that adds a level of detail which you can never get. So we go back to talking about Australia and Greenland with those rocks. If you take those rocks out of the context, you kind of lose the whole story. So I've had some of the Australia pulsed stromatolite samples in my lab before. And, I'm always looking at them going, yeah, okay, I can buy that it was life, but I can also think of other reasons why it can't be. I can understand why it could be this, it could be that. When I'm actually sitting there in the whole geologic setting and understanding what this place was like, that this was a shallow ocean because of this feature over here and that feature over there, and this is what happened here, and this is why these things got pushed up the way they are, and they actually were flat at one point. It just changes the way you look at the sample. And it's really important to be able to pick that up. And that's one of the real highlights of what Perseverance is going to do.
So what happens? Ooh, it's a little feedback.
We're getting feedback, yeah.
What happens if it's successful and we do find evidence of life at a million years ago, whatever, on Mars? In the movies, obviously, there's one of two options. The government covers it up, or they attack us and take us all over, right? But
right,
talking about it in real life, and I'm sure that's a discussion, like what happens when we actually find the thing that we're looking for. So what does that really look like? I mean, it's still,
That's an excellent question. If we found something that we could only think came from life, which would be called a biomarker, which the only way this happens, a dinosaur bone, or something walking in front of our view. For most of it, on this mission, a lot of the images and things come down and are available to the public before they're available by the science team. They automatically get uploaded to a website, a Mars Viewer website. So the public actually sees the pictures. It's about a 3-minute delay between when the science servers get a hold of them and when the public viewers get a hold of them, because they're not processed, they're not anything else like that. So, you know, I don't know what would happen, but from an image perspective, the public would see it. I don't know. I don't know how people would react. That's above my pay grade and not something I have to worry about. I'm sure that somebody's thought about it. It goes back to the whole, if we got an extraterrestrial signal, what would happen? I know what the movies say. The evil scientists and the evil government will hide it and things like that. But most scientists love to talk about what they do because they get really excited about it. And I can't imagine anybody not talking about it, because we're going to have missions to Europa and Enceladus in my lifetime, hopefully, that will actually go looking for extant life. And once again, it's all single-celled organisms, so it's not Godzilla or a sea monster. Right. I wouldn't think that those missions would have any problem saying, yeah, we think we found life on Enceladus and Europa, and let the public deal with that as they would. Now, the funny thing is that there's the exact opposite question, which is what happens if we find no life in anywhere else, which is another equally fascinating question. No matter what the answer is, but whether there's life in our solar system, it's a fascinating question, because what it does is there's a the idea of how much life is there in the universe is really directly related to this question of, is there life elsewhere in the solar system? If there's only life on the Earth, then maybe life is really rare in the universe. If there's life everywhere else in the solar system, maybe life really only needs water and energy source and organics, and then it basically starts anywhere else. And that means the whole galaxy would be teeming with life. Right. And so that's a whole different question. But if there's no life, maybe life is really rare. And maybe we should, think about what we're doing to the planet a little more. But, either way, it's a fascinating question. And from an ethics perspective, there's a lot of different things you can actually think about of where you would go with that answer.
Right. So here's we talked about before. It's not exactly accurate, but fairly accurate. All the different systems that are on board. Your focus was pretty much on SHERLOC and Watson, which it has the camera. And now we'll get into the calibration, how the geocaching part came about. I am fascinated by these other systems. I think it's amazing.
I can go through them real quick if you want. So all right, we'll go through. So SHERLOC is an arm-mounted instrument. We have Watson, part of us. We're a Raman and fluorescence spectrometer that does microscopic imaging. We have Pixel on the other side of us, and that's Abby Allwood's instrument. She's a JPLer. And that does X-ray spectrum. It's an X-ray spectrometer. And what that does is it gives elemental abundance. So it can tell you there's silicon in the rocks, which we already know, but what level of trace metals there are in the rocks, and that can lead back into the question of life itself too, because life likes different types of elements. And if we see something that doesn't make any sense from an elemental perspective, perhaps that's biology at work. META is a weather station. Jose Antonio is the PI of that. He's from Spain. That was donated by the Spanish with some NASA hardware associated with it. And it does wind speed, direction, humidity, pressure, things like that. It tells you what the weather's like on any particular day. There's a website. It's based on an instrument on MSL. And there's a website that has the weather every single day that you can go look at. SuperCam is the next generation of the ChemCam instrument that was on Curiosity, and this is a laser-based instrument that shoots out a high-powered laser beam that makes a little poof of smoke, and you look at the light that comes off that, and you can tell elemental abundance. And the difference between that and Pixel is this can do elemental abundance very far away from the rover, up to like 5 to 10 meters. It can also do Raman spectroscopy like we're doing, but it does it in much bigger spots. Our spot size is the size of a human hair, to 100 microns. So it's a very, very small laser spot. Their spot size is much bigger than that. And they're looking for more mineralogy, and we're looking for more organics. Mastcam Z is what brings us back to pretty picture, Jim Bell, University of Arizona. No, Arizona State. Sorry, Jim. And that is does great panorama cameras. If you saw the billion pixel image from the top of Mount Sharp that we released about 6 months ago, that's what Mastcam Z. That's what Mastcam was, and this is Mastcam Z, the next generation of it. RimFax is a product of Norway. It was donated. Sven Erik is the PI of that, and that's a ground penetrating radar. So we'll be able to look at what's underneath us to hundreds of meters down, so we can actually see what's in the subsurface. And that's really cool when we're going around driving, because we can see subsurface structure, which goes back into telling us where, what we're looking at in terms of the history of the particular site that we're at, which is really important for the sample cache. Moxie is a really cool instrument, and what that's going to do is that's another one of these tech demonstrations for the humans, as we like to call them. And what that does is that pulls Martian CO2 out of the atmosphere and turns it into oxygen to demonstrate that it can be done on the surface. And why we want to do that, it's not only for the astronauts to breathe, but much more important from that is oxygen is a part of rocket fuel. So if you're ever going to come back from Mars, if you send humans there, you might want to generate oxygen on the surface, because that way you don't have to bring it with you. It's millions of dollars per kilogram to bring things with you. If you made an instrument that was, in the $100 million range that could save you thousands of kilograms of mass, you would bring that with you, and it's basically living off the land, kind of what Columbus did with the boats. And then the last one was Ingenuity, which is on the Rover, which is, you can kind of see right there by where Moxie is. You can kind of see the picture of the helicopter. And that's the payload, with the addition to the drill on the end of the arm, and then the adaptive caching system.
Yeah. So one of the things that you do, and this has probably been on every rover, is that you need to be able to calibrate the camera, correct? Is that sort of a thing you do pretty much every time, just to?
We have to calibrate the camera and the spectrometer. So there's, things move around. We're on the side of a drill. Drills like to move. Spectrometers don't like to move. It's kind of like a natural enemies of each other. We're trying to get them living in peace. But, we want to make sure that when we see a peak, and we say that peak is at a certain wavelength, that peak is at that wavelength. And there's no way to calibrate it without looking at something you already know. And so we have this calibration target where we look at occasionally, and then we can, and that's a picture of the calibration target and Trevor Graph. And you can take a look at the material on there, and you can say, okay, I know this is Teflon. So Teflon has these 3 peaks at these particular wavelengths, and then we can calibrate the instrument from that particular calibration target. And that's what we've put together.
And so this time, somebody, and we'll talk about how this sort of came about, but somebody decided, hey, we could put a trackable code on it, a geocaching trackable code. Who was that?
Yeah. That was the group at Johnson Space Center. It was Mark Fries and Francis McCubbin came up with the idea. And they handled the talking with the geocache people, while I handled the talking of the people who would allow us to do this. And so if you have a picture of the target, there's a lot of things on there. What's that?
I was going to say real fast is that I think a lot of people have seen the trackable code, but the trackable. They haven't seen the code yet, but don't get too excited because you can't log it yet. But we'll show you the trackable, which I don't know if everybody's seen this or not yet, but here is the trackable right here.
Wow. Down there at the bottom of Baker Street. Now the black and white on the outer rim should not be visible. That's there to see if we've actually shifted in the calibration target. That shouldn't be visible, but everything on there is on there for a reason. And especially with the maze, we had a lot of issues. So, we're 180 million miles away with the rover, and it turns out that the rover arm is really, really good, but the rover arm isn't perfect. It can't get you down. We're on the micron scale, which is 1/100th of a millimeter, and our laser spot size and our ability to pick things up is on the tens to hundreds of micron scale. So we have a very fine piece of equipment, and the rover arm itself can only guarantee to about a half a centimeter, which is really, really good if you think about it, because it's 100 pounds on the end of that arm, 180 million miles away, with the temperature swings every day of 100 degrees C, and it can get you to where you need to be on to the order of a half a centimeter. But that's not good enough. There's some things that we need to figure out. So on the calibration target itself, on the top of it, you have all of these patterns, which we know exactly how thick the pattern is. So when we take an image of it, we can see how well the camera is working. We can see how well the camera is working both at the top and by the dancing man cipher at the bottom. So they both act the same thing, and we can't guarantee that the image we're going to get will have the images on the top. So we'll be able to look at the bottom and tell how well our camera is working. The reason why we have the maze, for example, is we have a scannable laser that goes through, and we can do line scans. And so we needed something that no matter how well the arm positioned us, whether it was off by a half a millimeter or whether it was rotated a little bit, whether we could scan across and tell how big our laser spot size is. And we did a lot of designs, and we couldn't figure it out because there was always something wrong with the design. And then Trevor and company at JSC came up with the idea of, let's do a maze, because no matter what happens, no matter how the arm puts us on this particular target, when you scan across, I can tell you how big my laser spot size is, regardless of what I'm looking at. And that's really important. So between the two of them, we can tell how good our instrument's working, both optically and from a laser perspective. Is the laser spot getting bigger? Is it getting smaller? Is it doing something we don't expect? Because there's nobody on the spacecraft to tell how well it's working. We have to take an image of something we know and take a spectra of something we know to determine how well everything's working. And so that's why we came up with both those things. And it was a pretty cool idea when we first came up with the Baker Street idea. So
yeah, that is so cool. Yeah, I got the page again. People want to get excited and go try to log it. They can't yet, but there's the trackable TB5EFXK, and of course it's locked. So.
Well, and you look at it, and this is interesting too, because it's really not really public yet, this page. There's already almost 2,000 people watching it, just waiting to see what happens.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, we're not sure when the first time we're going to take a picture of it either. So I think it doesn't go live until we actually take the picture. So that could be months into the mission, depending on how the first checkout phase is, because we check everything out for the first couple of months, making sure everything works. And we haven't put that plan together yet. So be patient, everyone. We're working as fast as we possibly can to get it up and live.
It's a great idea, and I mean, we've all been, this whole process was really cool, especially for people like Jesse and I. Were like, oh my, this is, so other people are like, space, boring. It's like, no, this is fascinating, and I'm so glad that you guys got involved. And like you said, there had to be some, based on things that wheels and stuff. You had to make sure that NASA was like on board, and so you had to say, we're going to put this geocaching trackable on. And like, okay, really? It's like, no, it's going to work. And get all these people on board. These are the things we want to put on there. And it's fun. These are the fun things we get to do. We have a piece of Mars meteorite that's going back. Yeah,
because, like I said, we have a scanner. And so we needed something that had nice, different mineralogy so that we could actually scan a region of it to make sure everything was working correctly. So we got a piece of Mars on loan from the Natural History Museum. Eventually, they may want it back. I'm not sure how they're going to get it back. I'd be happy to go get it for them. Well, I wouldn't, but I'd be happy to send somebody to go get it for them. But it's on loan. It's on the front of the rover. We will scan that. We'll take area maps of it. And one of the things we want to look at from that is to see whether the meteorite changed with time, because Mars is a very hostile place. It's got low pressure. It's got lots of dust particles. It's got other things going on, chemistry on the surface, and that's the last thing, which is the spacesuit material. Which a lot of those thing at the bottom of the white calibration targets are all spacesuit material. And so we've got, they all have a reason to be on there. They're Teflon or orthofabric, and we can use those to calibrate the spectrometer, but we can also see whether or not it degrades with time. And if it degrades with time, then maybe it's not the right thing to use as spacesuit material. So JSC was interested in looking at that as well. So it's a pretty cool little calibration target. And everybody has a calibration target, and everybody has things on the calibration target. The Mastcam Z calibration target has more of the humanity thing, which is really cool, which is something we probably should have thought more about instead of really cool things like geocaching, spaces, and spacing material. But it all works.
I found that fascinating that you said that we were talking about the other day, getting ready for the show, that you'd said that the whole thing about the Smithsonian said it was on loan, and you're like, okay, really? Hope they don't want it back anytime soon, because on loan, I think it's going to be there a while. Just
Natural History Museum was very, very good to work with. Carolyn Smith is the curator there, and she was fantastic. And it's a really cool piece of Mars that basically been sitting in her lab. Like I said, there's a lot of Mars meteorites, and they had one of this particular fall, SAU, and they had this other piece that weren't 100% sure what to do with. So we said, we got an idea. We're going to do a really cool experiment. And she's like, oh, that sounds like a really cool experiment. I'm in. And away we ran with it. And there it is. That's the one dead center is the meteorite.
The meteorite, yeah. So, I love that you look at the list. You got the sapphire disk. You got the Mars meteorite intensity target, which is the maze pattern. Different things in the we talked about before. About the polycarbonate spacesuit visor material to see what happens to it. Which is cool that you are testing that too. It's amazing, and it's just great. I just love the look.
And the thing is it allows us to actually make sure the instrument's working correctly, and it's fun at the same time. And that's kind of what we wanted to do with the whole thing, because getting the public engaged is really important, because what we do is really cool. And every time I go talk to a university or people like y'all, it's always fascinating. And the more people that get excited about it, because it is really cool and it's really interesting. And you may not grow up to be a rocket scientist, but you can grow up and do science. And we're not all just by the book. We sometimes have fun and sit around and design geocache targets with 21B Baker Street on it.
That is awesome. There's something that we run across as far as geology. Of course, you're familiar with earth caches. We'll talk about a little more geocaching now, as far as the geology part. If it's done right, Jesse, if it's done correctly, an earth cache can be kind of fun to see and investigate. Earth geology. And then I think that my wife is her one of her favorite things is earth caches. But again, it's like any geocache. If a geocache is done well, then and you learn something, whatever it happens to be, or if the hunt is a true hunt, there's a lot of different things about geocaching. I think a lot of times the outside world that doesn't understand geocaching, they go, it's a Tupperware at the bottom of a tree. What's that? But you were saying you were able to do the good thing, I guess, is that you've been able to. Fortunate thing is you've been able to travel around the world, and when you do have time to geocache, you're saying I think you were able to do some. Was it in the Mojave that you got to do?
We did a bunch of field work in the Mojave back in the early 2010s, and we would always pull up the application. And when we're done our day, it's like 7:00. It's not going to be dark for another couple hours, and you'd be out in the middle of absolute nowhere, and you'd be like in the part of Death Valley that you're sure that no one's been to for 50 years, because you can see the broken down car from 1910. And you you open up the geocache, and there's something around you to do when there's nothing else to do in the whole region. And that's pretty cool. And so you can go look at things, and people are really, and then you realize there have been a lot of people around, because then you look at the geocache and you say, wow, a lot of people have come to see this particular one. I can't believe anybody's been here. But it makes you feel really cool. And it's something that when you're in the field, that I know a lot of my geologist friends really enjoy doing, and we get a kick out of it. I don't go out in the field as much as I used to, but when I do, I will pull up that app.
Makes sense that you would be interested in such a thing. It's the same sense of adventure that sends people to the middle of Death Valley to look for a little box. Yeah. Same thing that gets humans to explore other planets and other, and continents back in the day, and planets now. And it's that same sense of adventure on a different scale, slightly, but that same sense.
Actually, the sense that the scale is actually pretty cool, because instead of, when you go out into the field and you're doing field research, it can be months to years before you get a paper out of it or you figure out what's going on. The geocache, actually, you can get something really cool out of it in a couple hours if you're good, which is, actually does make you feel a little bit better when things aren't working correctly. And sometimes they don't work correctly. So it's fun.
Scott's asking an interesting question. Could someone create a Mars cache, even if we would have to armchair it for a while, because obviously we can't be there? But I mean, which gets into, I think some people, Scott knows this, but there's no GPS satellites in Mars, so you couldn't get. But what's interesting about that question is, does JPL have some type of coordinate system for Mars? Is there some kind of way you could kind of look
there
at
is
it?
There is a Mars coordinate system, and it's up, and I don't know how they define the zero latitude, zero longitude, but we do have orbital assets, and you can see the rover. You can get pictures of the rover and the lander InSight that's up there now, and you could conceivably put up a coordinate system on Mars. We don't have a full way to judge exactly down to the centimeter as we do here, but eventually one day there will be a Mars GPS system. I would think you'd have to do that because the rover itself, when we operate the rover, the rover doesn't talk to us directly. The rover talks to orbital assets. So we talk to the rover 3 times a day. The orbiter comes over where the mission is. The mission then knows it's up there, communicates up, and then the orbiter gets all the information. And as the orbiter goes below the horizon, then the orbiter then sends things back to the Earth. So the rover isn't talking directly to us; it's talking to an orbiter. And so you always have to have those things in orbit in order to communicate correctly, because it's too much power to go direct to Earth.
Right, because we're still in conversation with Opportunity. Did I get it right?
Opportunity passed away, as it were.
That's right.
It's a sad day. Yeah, Opportunity basically ran into the planet-wide dust storm and lost power because it was solar. We still talk to Curiosity. Curiosity just drilled last week. We drilled a new hole. Mary Tamlin, I think is what the name of the hole was. And it's still going strong. Eventually, Curiosity will run out of power because it's a nuclear power source. And then it'll just, one day you just won't hear from it anymore. Same with Perseverance, which, has between a 9 and 15-year lifespan, depending on how well the nuclear power source can generate heat.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and that's the sad thing is all the really cool the other cool missions in the outer solar system, Cassini and Galileo, and with Jupiter and Saturn, they got to choose when they died. One day you're just going to pick up the phone and Curiosity's not going to be there, and you don't get to choose when that is, because maybe electronics board will go because it gets too cold. The temperature ranges on Mars usually goes down to about -100 C up to about 0 C. So that's every day. That's really hard on electronics. So the rover itself has something called survival heat, which uses to keep the electronics warm. Eventually, the rover won't be able to generate that much survival heat to keep the electronics warm. The electronics will start wearing out because of the thermal cycling of the electronics. So imagine putting your phone in the oven, taking it out, putting it in the freezer, putting it in the oven, and eventually the phone will die. And that's what happens to the big giant rovers. And it's a sad day when it happens. Everybody gets used to it because you work with this thing for years and years and years. I worked on Curiosity for almost 10 years, and you kind of becomes a cherished member of the family. You think of it as a person.
Yeah. Ryan wants to see AAAs. I don't know if AAAs are the best. Ryan knows better. He knows the AAAs are not that reliable of a power source. So come on, Ryan, you know better than that. He's supposed to be going to Oregon, so I don't know what he's still doing watching the show. But anyway, Owen said that Mars Transverse Mercator (MTM) map series has been used to publish geologic and whatever coordinates with positive east longitude as the primary grid. That's interesting.
Yep.
Very cool.
Yeah, I'd forgotten what the acronym was. It's but it's they've got, well, there's also Mars Year. So it's Mars Year. I think Mars Year 0 is from the first mission to Mars. I think that was Mariner. So I think we're in like Mars Year 70. And that's important because Mars has a longer year. So you need to be able to have a coordinate system for Mars as well as the Earth. So you can't just say, a date. It's important to have those things, which is why we have the sols and the Mars year and things like that.
And then we want to know, Jesse, I want to know if we could get one of the hills as you go in another area of Mars. Could we get one of the hills named after Geocache Talk? I just want to know if we could sort of secure that tonight. Make sure that Geocache
they
Talk.
Usually name the geology after things on the Earth, and then eventually, when my advisor, Professor Tom Dowyak, passed away, they named a feature on Mars after him. So the first sample we picked up, the first rock we picked up was Jake M was a rock. He was an engineer on MSL that passed away, and it was the first sample that we looked at on the surface. And I really wish I could pronounce his name correctly, but my tongue won't do it right now. Jake Meteorites. I can say it. Yes.
Yeah. So we're hoping for a Beagle Lake or something like that. Would be kind of cool.
No, because that means I'll have passed away. We don't want that for a long time.
Oh, yes. They should change the rules so that it's for people that are
I don't think they named anything for somebody who's still alive, but
oh, that's not good.
No.
Yeah. So Ryan says he's too nerdy not to listen. So okay, well you stick around, my friend. That's good. Yeah. So AAA service. We're sorry, Perseverance, but your membership only covers 2 charges per year, and you're done.
I assume that every time we send another one up, though, we get better on the longevity of the power source. We learn something new, right? With
the nuclear power source, it's all about mass, how much nuclear power you put into it. So, I mean, how much nuclear material you put in there, because it's basically a heat generation source, and there's a half-life associated with it. So, in order to keep that source going longer, you need to either increase the efficiency of electrical production from it or put more mass up there. And while we've increased the efficiency of the energy production, it hasn't been, actually I don't know what the efficiency is. It's probably like in the high teens. So eventually, they'll get to the point where it's much more efficient and will last much longer, and hopefully soon, because nobody wants to see once we get up there, it's so hard to get up there. It's so hard to put everything together. We've been working on this since 2013. We've been working on the concept of SHERLOC since 1998. So, this is a long time to be doing any of this. And you want to make sure everything runs as long as you possibly can. The rover itself, Perseverance, started off as a study back in 2010, and there have been people working on it ever since. So it's a long way, and you want everything to work. You want everything to be
as long as possible.
As long as possible. Get as much science out of it as you possibly can.
Well, and I think we're in a better age now than we are technologically. further ahead than we
Yeah.
always have been. But like even the graphic that Gary pulled up earlier, the amount of information that's funneled out to the public in real time, both with, its trajectory and everything else. And once it lands, the pictures that are being public, they're pumped out to the public. It's not, nobody's trying to hide anything. They're trying to expand knowledge, unlike the movies, they're trying to expand knowledge and ignite that excitement for space. So hopefully the next generations will, step into that field, in your shoes or whatever.
Yeah. And if we found any, I can't imagine if we found something really cool, I would tell everybody I knew.
Yeah.
And the pictures, there's actually one of the websites that looks at the pictures every day and to see things. And you can, like I said, you can go online and get the pictures from Mars as fast as we get them from the science perspective. They automatically upload it. All of our images with Watson will go online as soon as they come down. There's no filter. There's no delay. They hit the Earth on the DSN and they get pumped out to the public almost immediately.
Well, and that's what's fascinating. And I think hopefully that will excite people, right? You're able to have access to that information so quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. And we love talking about it. So we go out and give public tours and get as many people interested as possible, because this is what allows science fiction. This is the science fact that allows that science fiction to be all enjoyed.
The amount of, I forget the megapixels you said from that photograph earlier, but I mean, it's mind blowing.
Billions of pictures. Yeah, it's really cool. So it's on one of the Mars sites. I wish I had the web address, but you can go on there and you can scroll around, and it's got you're there. It's amazing. You're there. It's a fascinating panorama that they created for Mastcam.
Yeah,
we'll put in the show notes. I saw it too. So we'll throw in the show notes. People can see that. We put, for people that are new to watching this show, is on the Geocache Talk website. We do put our show notes. Once we kind of clean it up a little bit, we'll put that out under the show notes section. And so if people want to see a link, the links that I've been showing tonight will all be out there in the show notes. You can go look them up and check those out. So, that will be available tomorrow, probably sometime. So, all right. Well, we're kind of at the end tonight. Jesse and Dr. Beagle, if there's some last, we'll give everybody a chance to give sort of last thoughts tonight, last comments.
February 18th, 2021, we land, we go through the 7 minutes of terror, and then we are off on an amazing 11-year journey to do science, pick up samples, and really see if Mars had life associated with it, and or the origin of life started in Jezero Crater. And it's going to be a fascinating 11 years. It's going to be an awesome ride, and we're going to learn so much about the red planet and really where we are in the solar system. And that's, you can't stress that enough of how cool that is. And hopefully we'll encourage people to at least understand science more often in the scientific process, because that's really what's important, especially nowadays where people start questioning science a little too much. The scientific process is something that we're all fascinated by, and it's going to be a cool mission. I'm really looking forward to turning ourselves on for the first time. So,
yeah, and
Good comment.
fascinating. And we want to thank you. Are we there? For coming on. It's something positive.
Can I say this? Can I say this for my kids? 5 more minutes. We'll be there in 5 more minutes. That's the standard answer.
Yeah.
5 more minutes.
First of all, thank you for coming on the show and talking about this and stuff like that. But in a time when, we need some positive stuff and we need people to stop questioning, and you said it, I didn't, stop questioning science. It's real. But that's a whole different show, right? But you need a positive example of what science and math and physics and everything else is actually doing in the real world. This is an exciting way to see that happening in real time. And it's all connected to our hobby, which is great. It's connected to geocaching. Now we have a geocaching tie into it too. So even if you weren't into it before, come on. We live in the best time in human history. This is awesome. We get this just unfolds right in front of our eyes. It's another planet. I understand our hobby is based on our planet currently, but guess what? It's going to get there eventually. So it's gonna in February. Our hobby now goes to Mars. It's 2 planets. So really cool that you're on here, and hopefully this is something positive for people to get excited about right now. So
good. Yeah, I hope, and really, thanks for having me. I love talking about this stuff, as you probably can tell, because I probably talk way too much. But yeah, I love talking about this. I love bringing the excitement to the general public. It's great.
No, it's great. Maybe we could do one. Well, I know you're gonna be busy that day, but maybe when we get maybe closer to the date, maybe we don't want to. Like you said, we don't want to do the 7 minutes of terror with that. I'm sure you'll be you'll be at JPL watching the last few minutes of it. But we'll be watching with you. So it's great. Yeah, thank you so much again. Fascinating. I love it. Hopefully, it seemed like a lot of people did, loved it as well tonight. So cool. All right. Well, we're gonna do our outro, and we will see everybody next week, or actually Tuesday. We got our next show, which is Puzzle Talk. So, all right. If I can push the right button, we're gonna go here.
Folks, we hope you've enjoyed.
And it won't come up. Okay. That's weird.
I'm gonna put Gary in charge of this rover. So
yeah, don't put me in charge of it.
Or nobody's gonna die.
How weird. It won't show. That's okay. We're just gonna then say good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Thanks again.
You bet.